Now that we understand a little bit about Git, it's time we took a look at the command line version of it. This is going to be important as we learn GitHub for Windows, because all of the commands that happen in GitHub for Windows match with the commands that we're using in the Git command line. So GitHub for Windows is doing all of these operations behind the scenes for us. You'll notice here that I've opened up the Git command line. For this command line, I've used the PowerShell version of the Git command line tool. I'll show you later how we can open up this tool and use it. The Git repository that we're going to be connected to is one that I've already set up on GitHub. I'll show you in the next module how you can set up one of these repositories for yourself so that you'll be able to use this technique to access it. So what we're going to want to do is begin by getting ourselves an instance of the remote repository that I've set up already that's on GitHub. The way we're going to do that is by using the clone command, and we're going to specify the address of that repository. This command is just git clone followed by that URL there, which you can find on GitHub. When I run this, it's going to pull the data down and unpack it, and I will have a local copy of that repository. Now I have a local copy of this repository. The next thing we'll want to do is go into that repository and start working with it. So now that we've navigated into that repository, you can see that the command line has changed a little bit. It now has this master written in there. That is because we are actually inside of a Git repository at this time, and you'll see that it's going to be giving us a lot of information as we start working with Git. So the first thing we're going to want to do in this demo is to create a file so that we can see how the file creation process works. So now we have a file called About Brendan. So if we take a look at the directory, you can see here that we have a few files, including that one we just created. You'll also notice that the command line changed a little bit. It now says master and includes some numbers, as well as it has used the color red. This indicates that we've got some changes that we haven't told Git about yet, and it would like to know what they are. So we're going to go ahead and add that file to the repository so that it knows about it. So now you'll see that the command line actually changed here. This is because we have this new file. At this point, we can take a look and see the status of our current repository. You'll see here that it knows about that new file and that we have changes that are ready to be committed. So let's go ahead and commit those now. I'm going to commit this now, and I'm going to use the -m parameter, which is going to allow me to specify a message along with my commit. So now we have committed, just like we would have in any other source control system. This saves our files in the version control. Now keep in mind the difference here is that these files are still local to this computer. We have not sent any files out anywhere else. You'll also notice that the little command line changed a little bit. You'll notice some color changes as well as some numbers disappearing. So while before we had uncommitted changes and it was telling us about those, we no longer have uncommitted changes, so the numbers are gone. And our word master has also changed colors. Let me show you why. So now that we've pushed the changes, you'll see that master changed again. The color was indicating that we had changes local on our computer that hadn't been pushed out yet. That's really useful, because now we know whether or not we've forgotten to send anything up. There are visual indications like these inside GitHub for Windows also that will let you know whether or not you have synchronized your data and will allow you to do that. So the next thing that we want to take a look at is we'll take a look at our status at this point. You can see now, since we've committed everything, there's nothing to commit and our working directory is clean. So now if we open up a file and make a change, we'll see some differences. Now you can see that we can open this file and make some modifications. Once we've made these, we can go ahead and save the file. Now that we're back in the command line, if we take a look at the status of things, you can see that we have a modified file. Now you'll notice that everything's red. This is because we don't have any staged commits. If we want to stage that file, that means get it ready to be committed, we can add it. It's also possible to just commit and tell it to include the files that have not been staged. Instead of doing the automatically adding these files while committing, I'm going to take the approach of staging them first, just because that's the approach that I prefer. Now you'll see that things are green again because it's got changes that are ready to be committed because they're staged. So the next thing we're going to do is commit these. Now that we have that commit, we can go ahead and make another change. Now we have two changes in that file. Let's go ahead and commit this one. So you probably noticed that I typed git add before I typed git commit. This is a process called staging, which is essentially getting your changes ready before they are committed. I was not required to do this, but I find it good practice to make sure that I stage all of my files before I commit them. So we can take a look at the log and see what changes we have. You'll see that the first thing we had here is created a file about Brendan. The second thing is added info about Brendan to about Brendan. And the third thing is added Pluralsight info, the about Brendan. Looks like I typoed that. Now I'd show you some of the cool features of the command line here, of how we can fix that, but that's something that you should probably watch a course specifically on the command line to find. So I think you probably have a pretty good idea of how you can use commits and pushing to get things done. Now at this point, if we take a look at the GitHub website and look at the repository, you will actually notice that I have not sent up my most recent changes. We're still actually at a blank file for the aboutbrendan.md file. That's because we haven't pushed these changes yet. Now I'm going to go ahead and push these two changes, and those will end up on that site. So now it's sent those files up to github.com/brendanpluralsight/cmd-demo. If you go ahead and take a look at that repository, you'll see it's public and be able to see all of our changes and commit messages there right now. Here you can see that we've got our commits from the recent check-in and push that we did before. You'll see here that the commits have messages matching the ones that we typed in, and you'll see that we are on github.com/brendanpluralsight/cmd-demo. If we want to take a look at the individual file, we can just open this up, and you can see there are the changes that we made to our markdown file. We can take a look at the raw version of it here. You'll also notice that it has unique identifiers there. Those are actually so that the system can uniquely identify each one of those commits. In the example we mentioned before, where Brendan and Steve were coordinating, it's that unique ID that made it possible for Git to know that Steve and Brendan were actually working on the same code, and not just two commits that happen to be affecting the same files. It actually knows specifically which commits Steve had pulled into his repository and was working with. That is very powerful.